Jane Garner, Sabine Wardle, Casey Garrison and Monique Shepherd, and we'd like to thank you all for coming today, and we hope that you gain a lot from the symposium. The symposium is hosted by Charles Sturt University and the Future of the Professions Research Group. Our university is a multi-campus university located in regional areas of New South Wales in Australia. The Future of the Professions Research Group is a relatively new research group at the university, and it has several focus areas, including interdisciplinary collaboration and innovative practice for social justice outcomes. Our group members come from a range of disciplines, including philosophy, information and communication sciences, humanities and social sciences. And the Social Work in Libraries research team is a collaboration between library and information science colleagues and social work colleagues. And we're really excited to be working together as we feel that we're united by a focus on social justice, outcomes for our communities, and we've been inspired by the many possibilities offered to enhance social justice through social work in libraries. And we really hope that that's a mutual exchange between library sciences and social work. And we're hoping that the symposium today adds further momentum to what is obviously an area of interest to many people. And we're really also interested in innovations and interprofessional practice as well. So before I provide a detailed overview of today's program, I'd like to offer an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations lands on which we're located today and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge in particular the Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal, Gundungurra and Biripi people, who are the custodians of the unceded lands on which Charles Sturt campuses are located. I'd also like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri ethos of Yindyamarra Winghangana, the wisdom of respectfully knowing how to live well in a world worth living in. We'd also like to acknowledge and pay our respects to Australian, Indigenous and all First Nations colleagues joining the symposium today. And now to the program. So as you can see, we're fortunate to have such an interesting range of speakers with varying emphases on the theme of social work in libraries. We commence our day with Keren Dali's presentation on information science for social workers, and this will be a great foundation for building more bilateral partnerships between social work and library science as we all work to enhance client experiences and social justice. Keren's presentation will be followed by Beth Wala's presentation covering trauma-informed, person-centred approaches in public library settings as an emerging area of practice and as an opportunity for interprofessional collaboration. We'll then take a short 15-minute break before Patrick Lloyd's presentation on courage, protection and public libraries as safe community hubs for marginalised people in our communities. And then following Patrick's presentation, we have Mary Province, and she'll focus on strategies for de-escalating crises when dealing with library patrons experiencing homelessness. We then pause for a longer break of 1 hour. And when we return, there'll be a panel presentation focusing on panelists' experiences of social work student placements in libraries and library-based social work in a more general sense. Our 4 panellists for that session are Anne-Marie Farb, Chrissy Bolton, Erin McKeegan and Sabine Wardle. Straight after the panel presentation, we will hear from Anna Lockwood, and Anna will speak to us about relational approaches to practice and reimagining social work in alternative environments. There'll then be another short 15-minute break before we return to hear from Leanne Mitchell, and Leanne will be presenting on libraries and homelessness. And Leanne will be drawing in large part on her recent international fieldwork undertaken as part of her Churchill Fellowship. And then to close the symposium, Jane Garner will let you know about some exciting opportunities that we might all be able to stay in touch, as we're hoping to sustain the momentum for innovative approaches and collaborations in relation to social work in libraries. So I really hope that you enjoy the program, and I'll now hand you over to Casey Garrison, who will go over some of the practicalities for the day ahead, and she'll also introduce our first keynote speaker. So thanks very much again, and again, a warm welcome to you all. And over to you, Casey.
Thanks for that, Karen. Yes, I'm Casey Garrison. I'm a member of the SWiL team and senior lecturer at Charles Sturt. So just a few housekeeping items. All of the sessions will be recorded today and then sent to you after the symposium. Everyone who registered will get a copy of that recording. So if you have to leave or go to bed, feel free. You'll get the recording later. The closed captioning is on. And because we awesomely have so many attendees here, we've decided to turn off the mics and cameras. For questions, please put them into the Q&A, which is just at the bottom of your screen there next to the chat. And presenters will get to those at the end of the presentations. And you can use that chat function to talk amongst yourselves and add comments during the presentations. We're getting lots of introductions, and it's great to see where everyone's from. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dr. Keren Dali. Dr. Keren Dali is a faculty member in the Library and Information Science program at the University of Denver in the US. A social worker and an academic librarian in her professional past, Keren's primary research interests are the areas of disabilities and workplace equity, reading practices of minoritized adult readers, and LIS education. Keren's work over 2 decades has been recognized by several research, teaching, and leadership awards and funded by the American Library Association, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services in the US, among others. She served as the inaugural editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Information Diversity and Inclusion, and is serving on several editorial boards of major LIS journals in present. Keren's presentation today is entitled The Information Lives of Our Clients, Information Science for Social Workers. So with that, off to you, Keren. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Casey, for this wonderful introduction, and welcome everyone to this wonderful symposium. I'm really delighted to be here and really humbled that I have this opportunity to address so many individuals from 2 really prominent fields concerned with communities and the public good and social justice. So I will share my screen in a minute, but I wanted to say that as I start talking, I will turn off my video just to save the bandwidth and make sure that everything runs smoothly. I will reemerge at the end of my presentation for questions and answers. So as has been said, I was a social worker in my professional past. At some point, I switched careers, but it doesn't mean that I stepped away from social work. And for over 2 decades, I've been working on the intersection of social work and library information science. So I just wanted to say a few words about the kind of work I've done recently. In 2018, I tried to reconceptualize the notion of a blended professional in application to individuals formally educated in both social work and LIS. I also wrote about the possible collaboration between social workers and academic librarians in an effort to prevent bullying and discrimination against people with disabilities on campus. Later on, in an editorial for the International Journal of Information Diversity and Inclusion, during my tenure as editor-in-chief, I wrote about the practical aspects of biased interviewing that disadvantages individuals with hidden disabilities, and I also relied on social work concepts. Recently, I have participated on 2 peer-reviewed panels at the Canadian Association for Information Science Conference and the Association for LIS Educators. And earlier this year, I've published a co-authored paper about accreditation standards in the US and Canada that reviewed how accreditation documents for social work programs in both countries integrated education for information and technology education. So that's been an upshot of my recent work. But the question is, what brought me to this specific topic of this keynote today? So if you look through the roster of recent publications on the intersection of LIS and social work, and at the nature of professional collaborations and partnerships, you will notice two most prominent trends. First of all, there is a discussion of how social work knowledge and skills can benefit LIS education and practice. And also, there is a prevailing focus on public libraries. So that being said, collaborations are rarely sustainable if there is no mutual benefit and contribution. And I think that the contribution of information science into the practice of social work and social work education is much more rarely discussed and probably somewhat underestimated. So this is the gap that I wanted to address today and talk about how social work can benefit from the knowledge and skill sets traditionally associated with information science. So when I was planning for this keynote, I also thought that the most important thing today is conversation. I don't really know if many colleagues can confidently position themselves as experts on this synergy between social work and library information science. And I think we're still collectively trying to figure it out. And this realization underlies my talk today. I'd like to share some of my thoughts on the matter and supported by my recent research. And I was really hoping to engage everyone here in conversation. So to do that, I will be posting some questions to the audience as I move along. And I hope you can respond to these questions during the discussion period, or if you only have a brief comment, please put it in the chat. The chat is continuously monitored. And please feel free to take a screenshot of the questions. I also wanted to acknowledge that my perspective on the issue is limited geographically and culturally to North America, and I recognize this limitation and bias. And so I really hope that the discussion that we'll have at the end will highlight the international experience. I also hope that jointly we'll be able to consider the potential contribution of information science to the education and practice of social work. And I actually wanted to start with a little personal story. So after I had my PhD in information science and worked for a few years as a faculty member in LIS, I decided to go back to school and get my master's of social work. So I'm in class, and the class is dedicated to the issues of social justice, equity, and diversity in social work. And the professor is discussing a series of studies about women in racialized immigrant communities who experience domestic abuse. So in the process of this discussion, many social, psychological, cultural, familial, systemic factors are being discussed, but I'm sitting there and listening. And for me, this information is filtered through multiple information phenomena. So I could actually clearly identify some information factors that contributed to the situation in which women found themselves, to the family dynamics, to the social conditions in their communities, and so on. I could see some factors that could, by extension, become part of an intervention program and future change. So, for instance, I could clearly notice the effects of information poverty when women systematically and systemically were denied equitable access to essential information, when they lacked requisite information literacy skills to locate, select, and interpret information. As a result, they often found themselves affected by the deficient information infrastructure in the context of their communities and their families. Also, they often resided on a have-nots side of the digital divide, which essentially strips individuals of privilege and power in today's information society. There were definitely accompanying issues of information overload, information anxiety, information filtering, but none of these factors were included as variables or even as contextual factors in a discussion that we had in the classroom about this community. At the same time, accounting for this really information saturated and technology mediated environment in which these women lived and made decisions day to day, it could lend new insights and contribute to more effective and sustainable ways to help them cope and achieve change to their situations. So this experience also reaffirmed my conviction in the potential synergy between social work and information science, and really the urgent need to make the knowledge of information behaviors, information phenomena, and information policies part and parcel of social work education. So so I guess, today, when we look at the situation that's going on, information scientists and information community practitioners are readily embracing the influence of technology on social change. And we certainly see the evidence of it in a wide array of interdisciplinary research collaborations, applied initiatives that really use the power of technology in the interests of social justice and community engagement. For social workers specifically, the benefits of integrating technology into professional practice has been recognized for quite a while. So even back in 2008, Trigigel and Darcy wrote that information and communication technologies have the potential to strengthen interactions between families and workers and change the conditions of initiation, distribution, and use of spoken and written text in social work practice. This could significantly affect the ability of service users to be heard and to influence decision-making. Even back then, social workers were encouraged to explore the advantages that information and communication technology offers service users and workers as well. And they were encouraged to challenge the notion of the digital divide. However, back 15 years ago, the opportunities and limitations of this computer-mediated communication were relatively new. It was a relatively new area of studies, a relatively new area of application, and it required considerable care, of course. However, once again, even back then, it was recognized that information and communication technology is a worthy investment because social work is both uniquely positioned and ethically obligated to ensure that the drive of technological evolution is a project open to all, and that it doesn't replicate or amplify existing inequality. So this is something that resembles remarkably one of the utmost goals and ethical imperatives of information science. In more general terms, information communication technologies and artificial intelligence can improve service delivery, remove access barriers, and engage service users who were previously excluded because of health conditions, geography, transportation, scheduling barriers. Second of all, information communication technologies can restructure and reshape traditional social work roles. They can impact the boundaries of social work engagement. In addition to being therapists, social workers can now perform the roles of facilitators, organizers, support builders, aggregators, and they can also serve as professionals who legitimize information sources. Now, the latter will necessitate close collaboration between social workers and information science practitioners or librarians, and definitely collaborative education. Third, ICTs and artificial intelligence can engage populations that haven't had access to social services or maybe deliberately eschewed social services because we have a lot of groups of individuals who feel safer online than offline. So that was a major shift. In addition, ICTs and artificial intelligence can restructure the nature and quality of provided services by making them more accurate, more timely, flexible, on demand, and really individually paced. It can remove the restrictions of high costs and limited business hours. Now, the role of ICTs and artificial intelligence is not limited to improving practice on a micro and meso levels. They're also excellent instruments for macro level social change and for supporting the public good. So, aside from these general improvements in professional practice, there are also multiple opportunities in specific applications. For example, one of the most significant qualities is the ability of artificial intelligence to predict this predictive capacity in suicide prevention, criminal behavior risk assessment, health risk assessment, and so on. However, with this potential comes responsibility, and we need to be acutely aware of the issues of decontextualization, discrimination, and profiling when we use these technologies. So there are two other strategies that gain popularity in social work, and this is gamification and gaming. Gamification is the integration of game-like mechanics to non-gaming environments in order to support the learning of specific behaviors. Gaming, on the other hand, is the incorporation of actual games into an activity. So both gaming and gamification can be some of the most useful mechanisms for engaging with diverse populations of clients. Clients with depression and substance abuse, clients involved in violence prevention and intervention, clients with cognitive disabilities, age-related cognitive changes, learning disabilities, and so on. It can also be useful for disengaged and disadvantaged learners. All of these technologies can be used for promoting civic participation, community building, and social protection. So, on a different note, the use of ICTs allows for enhanced collaborative relationships between social workers and clients. And one of the most important things, and probably my favorite, is that it allows for greater exposure to the lived experiences of clients. The notion and the concept and the practice of digital storytelling is gaining momentum, I guess, across different disciplines. And storytelling in online environments is really something that can shift the center of authority and power from professionals to clients. So now, despite the obvious benefits, the pace of technology adoption in social work may be slower than in some other areas of human activity and in some other professions. Some critics note that it happens because of the hesitation of both practitioners and scholars when it comes to using different forms of technology, lack of education and training, lack of exposure to the practical applications of technology in therapy and community work. So this can result from misconceptions and reservations. Also, despite the recent shift in empirical data, there may still be insufficient evidence for the effectiveness of ICTs in social work. And the situation is unlikely to change if we experience the constant lack of funding. And of course, one of the biggest obstacles is personal attitudes, fear of technology and change, inflexible mentality. And when we kind of look into the root cause of these attitudes, social workers have reservations about ethics, privacy, data security. Some social workers who've been in the field for a while have discomfort with a competence of young people in ICTs. They almost feel as though they're not really suited for working with clients online. And there are also some unarticulated concerns. And nevertheless, life goes on, technology develops and concerned with this inevitability of ICTs, artificial intelligence, and social media, and their effect on social work practice, professional bodies in North America have begun issuing guidelines and manuals to help practitioners navigate this increasingly technologically saturated field. So on the screen right now, you see some examples of documents that were developed in recent years. Technology in social work practice in the US, social media use and social work practice in Canada, and the US and Canadian regulation of social work electronic services by the Association of Social Work Boards. So this is what's happening in the area of professional practice. But the question is, what about social work programs? What about social work education in general, where it all begins? Where budding social workers join the field even before they enter professional practice often. So please don't take this statement as an empirically based conclusion. My statement is based on an overview of existing literature, conversations with social work colleagues, my personal impressions, and my own experience in a social work program. However, based on all of these sources, it appears that technology is present in social work programs in the form of learning management systems, e-portfolios, digital library resources, and distance and hybrid education. However, when it comes to courses on technology, let alone courses on information, it may not be integral to social work curricula, or at least these courses may be infrequent. Also, I wanted to stop and give a couple of definitions because although I've been using the term information and technology education, it's actually two distinct things. So if I were to give a definition of education for information, it would be the knowledge of information phenomena such as information seeking, information literacy, credibility assessment, information poverty, information avoidance. So it can be argued that recognizing information phenomena as part and parcel of clients' environments, decision-making, psychological state is a professional skill. At the same time, the ability to include information phenomena in clients' assessment and intervention design is a professional competence. So technology education is something slightly different, and it can be defined as both awareness of and ongoing engagement with various forms of technological developments, and the ability to utilize technology competently for different purposes in order to facilitate clients and community outreach, as well as professional development and education and communication with partners and stakeholders. So really, you know, two very, very important things that seem to be currently insufficient in social work education. However, the recent pandemic catalyzed the need for developing these two directions at a much greater pace. So quoting the recent study, for many social workers, incorporating digital clinical tools as a means to remain connected to clients, provide services, and complete documentation remotely has become a new skill set. It has become an essential competence, and really ethical guidelines have been developed to facilitate it. At the same time, the use of digital technology created new ways and opportunities for social workers to interact and communicate with clients. And that's exactly the point when my colleague Nadia, Katie, and I started to wonder about the guidance that social work programs receive from accreditation bodies and accreditation documents. We believe that more encompassing and sustainable change begins with adjustments to accreditation policy and accreditation standards. We used the method of content policy analysis and looked into accreditation documents for social work programs in the US and Canada from the standpoint of their guidance related to information and technology education. The results of this study were published earlier this year in a journal called Social Work Education. So the upshot of our findings was that information and technology education is not an integral part of guidance in accreditation documents in both countries. This kind of education is seen more as a bonus, not as essential knowledge. And of course, we realize that, accreditation guidelines are fairly flexible, and individual programs can introduce information and technology courses at a local level and kind of remedy the shortcomings of educational policy. However, we also recognize that stage-setting documents, policy documents, should give sufficient credence and importance to information and technology education. And this is something that apparently it's not happening. So following our analysis, we proposed concrete possible changes to the wording of accreditation documents if they wanted to integrate information and technology education more organically and more fully. And this is where I want to stop and make my first pause and ask my first question. Again, please feel free to take a screenshot of it, but I will repeat it at the end. How has your curriculum changed in response to COVID-19? And not only temporarily to accommodate online learning, but also in terms of more sustainable curricular changes? Have you developed new courses, new specializations, and so on? Apropos, a more general question is, how many social work programs have specializations in information science, dual degrees? How many programs encourage their students more informally to take courses from information science? So please consider these questions and either put your responses in the chat or we can hear them at the end of this talk. So one of the focal points of our recommendations was the importance of knowing and understanding information and technology-driven policies by social workers. Now, this is directly related to their engagement with larger macro-level issues. We propose that policy study be integrated in a coursework and field experiences of social workers in order to facilitate relevant education and practice. And these policies include, but are not limited to, the digital divide and access to information policies, data governance law, Freedom of Information Acts, copyright laws, certification standards for social workers on the ethical use of information and artificial intelligence, and some other policies that you see on the screen right now. Another important conclusion that we've drawn from this study was the fact that social work accreditation documents show more awareness of technology-related issues and their effect on social work practice than awareness of the role of information in social work practice and in clients' lives. So this is noticeable in accreditation documents from both Canada and the United States. Some awareness of technology, very little or no awareness of the importance of information. So that could become an important point of policy revision because the lack of knowledge of information behaviors and phenomena may not allow social workers to understand clients' behaviors fully, to understand the context of their lives, and to capitalize on this knowledge when designing interventions and therapy. So at the macro level, it may also mean a limited ability of social workers to intervene in the systems and policies, especially if these policies and systems are information-based or information-driven. So in this regard, I'd like to invite you again to think about how much guidance, accreditation, and other education guidelines in your country provide in terms of information and technology education. And irrespective of education policy guidelines, are there any considerations in your curriculum, not only for technology education, but actually for education for information? And this is something that I would like to wrap up with by mentioning that education for information is really important to social workers in very specific terms. The notion of information society is fundamental for information professionals and librarians because the information context determines every aspect of our lives. So as information professionals, we use it all the time. And I think this notion should be just as fundamental for the practice of social work. An integral attribute of information society is the digital divide or a gap between individuals, households, businesses, and geographic areas at different socioeconomic levels with regard to opportunities to access information and to use the internet for a variety of activities. Now, in all fairness, the concept of the digital divide is found in social work research, and it should take a more prominent place in a social work curriculum as well. A related concept is the concept of information poverty, or a situation in which individuals and communities within a given context do not have the requisite skills, abilities, or material means to obtain efficient access to information. This can be particularly true for specific communities that we frequently see use social services. And it is equally important for social workers to understand information anxiety or stress that is caused by the inability to access or understand the needed information. It can be caused by information overload, the lack of clear organization to information, insufficient information, excessive difficulty in information presentation, and so on. So this knowledge would be particularly significant in healthcare and mental health care settings. The same can be said about a related behavior of information avoidance, which is an extreme instance of information filtering. People engage in information filtering in order to reduce stress and anxiety, manage uncertainty, and find confirmation to their attitudes and decisions. And finally, the notion of information and digital literacy is crucial. It's not only crucial for understanding clients, but also for empowering them. Information literacy is really a requisite skill of empowerment, and this is something that social workers can utilize much more effectively. So in this regard, my last set of questions, I'd like to invite you to share personal examples of using technology and information concepts from your professional practice and teaching. One thing that I was actually wondering about in particular is your experience with expanding online education for social workers and teaching clinical skills online. So this is a summary of questions. I will return to it in just a second, but for now, I just wanted to thank you for listening to me, for staying with me through this talk. Please stay in touch. Please make contact if you'd like. I'm really pleased to be here, and I really hope for some discussion. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Karen. Lots of great information there. And yeah, people have been sharing answers to your questions in the chat. I'm sorry about the closed caption. We've not been able to get that sorted, but we are working on that, everyone. So please, yeah, we'll get to that. But so we have a few questions in the Q&A, and then I've grabbed some from the chat too. First, Karen, can you explain a little more about information filtering? Janet's asking that one.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that these questions come up because obviously I used a lot of concepts from information science, and I took care to give definitions and explain it. But information filtering is a selective behavior, an elective behavior, something that individuals choose to do for various reasons. So this is something that we often hear with regard to health situations, health information seeking behavior, when individuals are so threatened by the information that they might learn that they tried to filter it out in order to remain calm, in order to preserve this state of uncertainty, because uncertainty means safety, at least at this moment. So information filtering and information avoidance, it can be used as a defense mechanism, but at some point it really becomes counterproductive and works against the individual. So information filtering and information avoidance is a really big topic of study in information science, and not only in information science. A couple of years ago, when I did a paper about information filtering and avoidance, I noticed that there is a massive amount of research coming from psychology, of course, but also business administration, human resource management, industrial relations, and all the fields that essentially deal with human subjects. So this is what it is. And I think, understanding how information filtering works would really be helpful to social workers. I wish I had known about all these information concepts when I was a social worker practicing in the field of gerontology and mental health.
Thanks for that, Karen. And Farsat in Auckland asked a question: in your study/experience, is digital equity, internet poverty, and digital divide at the same level for Native/non-immigrant communities, and how community and public libraries can bridge this gap?
That would be a topic for the entire conference or a special issue. It's really one of the most I guess, most open and most intensive discussions in information science. And I think it should become just as important discussion in social work. I didn't mention communities that are most frequently affected by this digital divide and information poverty, but we definitely see it in rural communities. We see it in northern communities. We see it in indigenous communities as well, but not exclusively. Sometimes we look at a big city and we see this digital divide in inner city communities as well. So really, there are different populations and different groups in our society that are affected by the digital divide and its effects, and by information poverty. But that's kind of on a local level. If we look on a more international level, there is a global digital divide as well, when we see these differences between countries and nations. So it's really kind of very important to take a look at the local manifestation of the digital divide and the global one as well. And we have a lot of colleagues in information science for whom it's a primary area of research. It's also one of the growing areas of professional practice and community engagement. I know that a lot of folks in Canada, specifically the University of Alberta, engage in bridging the digital divide in northern communities in Canada. Now, public libraries can definitely do a lot to help with the issue of the digital divide. But the way I personally see it, the most helpful actions would be at the local level, because public libraries know their communities, and there is no kind of one-size-fits-all solution. You really need to be sensitive to what's happening with the population in the area that you serve, because there isn't a single manifestation of the digital divide. It's a very multifaceted phenomenon.
Thanks, Karen. And along with that, Louise asked, how does information poverty differ from the digital divide?
Well, it's really kind of, a related but different phenomenon. The digital divide is related to the infrastructure as well as skills, individual skills or community-related skills, digital and information literacy. Information poverty is something that affects individual communities. So it's more about a phenomenon and an event and kind of, infrastructure, if you will, and something that is experienced by individual communities. So there is a lot of overlap. But the way I define it is infrastructure versus community developments and individual people.
Great. And then kind of relating to that too, Georgina asked if you could define the term information phenomena again.
It's everything. That's the basic definition. So when I talk about information phenomena, I talk about all things information behavior, information literacy, information avoidance, information filtering, information, anything that you can think of. And I remember my own education as a social worker, and then I remember my second experience of re-entering the field of social work through the master's program in social work, which, by the way, I did not complete because I got a job, I had to move, so I had to lapse my degree, unfortunately. But I remember how little we actually discussed anything related to information when we talked about clients, when we talked about communities. And for me, after being, for so many years in the information field, for me, it was strange. For me, a big piece of our clients' lives was missing from this discussion. And that's why, we started looking into accreditation documents and other things. So really, information phenomena is everything information.
Yeah, no, it's interesting how interdisciplinary we become. Pamela Peters has asked in the chat, she noted it's been a couple of decades since her degree, but there was no real tech study involved. She said she wished she'd known more back then in respect to social work, and wonders how to combine those two areas and study more effectively, social work and technology, how to combine those.
I'm going to say build collaborations with information scientists in your area or in your university or, in an area where you practice, because there is a lot of exchange that can be done. And sometimes, barriers that we have are very artificial. I know that in my department right now, we are thinking about the ways to build more collaborative relationships with social work. I don't really know in what form and shape it will come. Unlikely as a dual degree, but maybe some kind of specialization, maybe some kind of certificate. So this is something that is really, really important. Dual degrees are really problematic. When you talk about two fields, both of which have accreditation standards and accreditation practices, a dual degree would result in an astronomical number of credits for students. So it could become very expensive. And once it becomes expensive and really complicated, then we start talking about equity in education, who will have access, who will have the ability to complete this program. So maybe it's more problematic and more difficult to establish. However, such things as certificates and specializations, that's definitely doable. And I think, the first step for this would be to start with some cross-listed courses. I know that when I accepted the job at the University of Denver, I came with a syllabus, Foundations of Information Science for Social Workers. It hasn't happened yet, but the syllabus is sitting there, and I'm ready to go at a moment's notice. I'm ready to offer this course because I've sort of been, on both sides of the counter, and I understand the practice of social work, how social workers think, because I was one of them at some point. And I also understand how information scientists think. So for me, it's really important, to start small and to start offering these courses. And, I actually didn't come up with this idea of a course on my own. When I was in a social work program, my classmates told me, Keren, can you teach a course on foundations of library information science for social workers? And I thought it was a brilliant idea. So I cannot take the credit for coming up with this idea, but I can take the credit, a small credit, for developing some steps towards the implementation of it. So I guess there is interest, and at some point we're going to start seeing more of this.
That's great. Yeah, I think you'd have quite a few interested students in this group that would like to take that class. And then thinking about it from a public library perspective, Dan has asked, what strategies can we employ in the public library to reach out and connect with the social work community?
I think public libraries, at least, like I said, I have a very limited North American perspective. So please forgive me. I'm acutely aware of this limitation, but at least in Canada and in the United States, we see a lot of this collaboration happening already. Some public libraries started hiring social workers as their permanent staff, part-time or full-time, and I can see how integral social workers become to library programming and different services that are being offered, how they bring the community closer to social services, but also help with kind of overcoming this fear and stigma of social services, because it is in a library, it is in a safe space. So there are different models, but hiring social workers is one way. Hosting social work students for internships and field placements, that's been another common strategy that's been employed by public libraries in Canada and in the US. And I think, you don't really need to invent something complex. It's really about reaching out to your local social services, finding connections and points of intersection in your local LIS departments or social work departments, because I guess, both disciplines have a lot of similarities. We're all about communities. We're all about trying to help individuals achieve their full potential, be it a community or a person. So I think, there aren't as many barriers as we think there are. We just need to start talking to each other, reach out, ask a question, see if there is interest. And I'm pretty sure that you will find like-minded individuals and individuals who will get really excited about this prospect.
Great, thanks for that, Keren. And yeah, you're getting lots of answers to your questions in the chat. I think that Graham makes a good point about open access resources, and that was kind of in response to your second question there, where Wendy had noted during her degree shoot, they were forced or encouraged to use peer-reviewed journals and academic journals rather than the internet. But as Graham notes, with the lack of open access resources, that digital divide is kind of perpetuated. So do you have any thoughts on that, Keren?
Open access is, again, it's something that is growing in popularity, both in practice and as an area of research. But I don't know if I can answer this question kind of, in aggregate. It's more like you need to look at each situation individually. Open access resources are really important, but today there is such a huge area that is controlled by subscription and by large corporate publishers that I don't know if we can find everything we need in this open access area. And of course, yes, that's exactly the reason for, for the digital divide that we are talking about. At the same time, like I said, there is really hopeful developments in terms of open access resources growing, not only in number, but also in quality, because open access at some point had this stigma that it's low quality, it's uncontrolled, cannot be trusted. It's all changing right now, big time. So open access resources are really important, and I think, it will develop into the future. But I think it's also very important to work with corporate publishers and to work with subscription resources and to make sure that we do something to make this information accessible to the public. I can give you an example of one of my most recent projects. We did a project that was funded by the University of Denver, and it was about academic libraries and professional development. So we published the findings in the Journal of Academic Librarianship. So the actual articles are subscription-based. However, we created a companion website, and within the boundaries of copyright, not violating any agreements and not violating any laws, we did information summaries, we did extracts, we created videos, short 10-minute videos with the overview of this research. We created almost like an asynchronous workshop for individuals who are interested in this research. So a lot of resources, a lot of downloadable handouts. So by so doing, yeah, it was time and effort, and this effort is not going to be appreciated when we go for tenure or promotion, but it gives us this peace of mind that we've done our best to bring these resources to the community of practitioners and the community of users who do not have access to expensive subscription resources. So we can find creative ways to actually make it happen and create open access resources, even if we publish with commercial publishers and on subscription.
Thanks for that, Keren. And I think we have time for one more question, and that's going to be from Smita from Yara Libraries. And I think she can speak.
Hey.
Hi, Smita.
Hi. So
Hi.
this is very interesting for us because we are inner suburbs of Melbourne city, and we have what we call flats or towers, which house the homeless people, which house the refugees. And we had, during lockdown, and Melbourne, Victoria had huge lockdowns, like for almost 2 years. These flats were completely locked down, and the library, the public library, we basically jumped in to supply food, books, and whatever help we could to the community. But we also have the issue of having a lot of people coming in, or customers coming in with a huge mental health issues, with drug, alcohol issues, because it's our community, and we are struggling. We're struggling because our staff have been abused. Our staff haven't been able to cope with the special needs of this, and we are we can't afford a social worker. So, do you have any advice on how, in cases where we can't afford a social worker on our staff because it's very expensive to give them the professional salary? Do you have any advice for public libraries on how we can get some social work help, or how we can deal with our special needs customers? We know we need a social worker, but we can't afford it.
Yeah, so thank you so much for this question. And this is unfortunately the problem that a lot of libraries struggle with, because they desperately need this kind of expertise on staff, but there is no budget, there is no funding, and it's just impossible to hire a person who would specialize in this kind of thing. And it's not only about social workers. A lot of public libraries would like to have a public health nurse in addition to a social worker, because even social workers, there is professional boundaries, and they're limited in what they can or cannot handle. So this is a big problem, and I don't even know if it's a satisfactory solution. But one solution is to provide training to your library staff. Again, there is going to be a limitation to how much training you can provide to library staff. Some of your library staff may push back, and they say that they're not comfortable with doing this, performing certain tasks or engaging with clients in a certain way. But some will be